himself to death. He's not slept good. And then he gave us some furniture for the office over there, and then he started calling me about, when you go come and get it, when you go. It rained every day, I think, this past week. So bless his heart, Brandon went down yesterday and loaded up on his shoulders. I don't know how he done it, but he picked that couch up. I couldn't lift one end of it. He picked that couch up and carried it in that building on his back, carried off the porch down there and put it on the trailer, and then he carried it in the building. And oh well. But I'm glad to see this pulpit up here. Now Kenny's wanting to cut this off right here, so he said it's blocking the view. And I'm sitting here tonight looking at these things, and I thought, I'm not going to let him do that. Rick, all we have to do, come out here and take those screws out. We'll put them down in the floor here, have to get the putty out, and just move the steps and everything down that way and move it down that way. And we're not going to cut that off. But that will give us, I put the steps down, and I was thinking some way maybe putting this on rollers. At Twin Valley, I had my pulpit on rollers, and we kept it in the back of the church. And I know me and Jim Tussey used to talk about an altar. Jim was very against the altar in the church because of what some churches do with the altar. But I think it would be nice if we had maybe moved those steps out a little bit and put not a kind of a kneeling bench across the front here. That way. Huh?
I think you can see the pulpit. I don't think it's distracting.
Well, it's we thank God for what He's given us. Look at the piano sitting over here, and but we see something coming all the time, the new fellowship hall, and we really, really got to see the blessing that was this past Friday for the family coming in, having a place, and we need to be there for them. But I started to say, I talked to Kenny about making a new pulpit stand, teaching stand here, something, but we don't have to have everything, do we? Genesis chapter 35. Genesis chapter 35. We only got halfway through last week, and I'll be honest with you, I have looked and looked and looked at this end of this today, wondering where I'm going with it, and I know when I started out, I thought we would go to this point right here where we stopped last week, and I just cut it off there because that's what I've been want you all to see mainly as to where Israel came from, the nation of Israel. Well, we've seen that last week. Israel came because God called a family, the family of Jacob, changed Jacob's name to Israel, and now we're going to see the 12 tribes. But let's pick up here in verse 16 where we left off last week. And let me just read these verses for us. And they journeyed from Bethel, or Bethel. We're going to pronounce that L-E-L. I was sitting in a doctor's office this week, and a girl comes to the door, and she says, "Noel," and I just sit there. And Kyra jumped up. She said, "You call for us?" And she said, "Noel." I never thought about it until then. I got an E-L on the end of my name. Do you know what E-L stands for, don't you? That's the name for God. Now, I'm not saying you call me God, but I told her, I said, we're not one of those sophisticated Noels. I'm a Noel. I've been a Noel ever since God got into this world, so we're not going to claim that title. But he journeyed to Bethel. And there was but a little way, we'll point that out, to come to Ephrath. And Rachel travailed, and she had hard labor. And it came to pass when she was in hard labor that the midwife said unto her, "Fear not, thou shalt have this son also. And it came to pass, as her soul was departing, for she died, that she called his name Benoi. But his father called him Benjamin. And Rachel died and was buried in the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. Don't miss that. And Jacob set a pillar upon her grave, that is the pillar of Rachel's grave unto this day. And Israel journeyed and spread his tent beyond the tower of Edar. And it came to pass when Israel dwelt in the land that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard it. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. The sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Simeon and Levi and Judah and Issachar and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. And the sons of Bilhah, Rachel's handmaid, Dan and Naphtali. And the sons of Zilpah, Leah's handmaid, Gad and Asher. These are the sons of Jacob, which were born to him in Padan Aram. And Jacob came unto Isaac his father, unto Mamre, unto the city of Arba, which is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac sojourned. And the days of Isaac were 180 years, and Isaac gave up the ghost and died, and was gathered unto his people, being old and full of days. And his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. And thus we finish up the 35th chapter of the book of Genesis. We've been a long time in this book so far. I wanted to close here, and Kyra said, no. We got to cover Joseph. Well, if we covered Joseph, that means we got to go to the 50th chapter. And Joseph, everybody would say that he was the main son of Jacob or Israel, but he wasn't. The main son would be Judah. He's the important one. But Joseph is going to play a very important part. But we see some things in these verses that I want to share with you tonight. After completing his pilgrimage, he's been gone now for, I feel like, 30 years. I was reading a commentary this afternoon, and he said that probably just a little over 20 years. Well, I don't believe that to be very accurate. I might settle for 25 years, but I would probably lean more to 30 years, because you travel 500 miles on foot by yourself. That's going to take weeks into months. That's to get there. Then he was there with Laban for 20 years, and then he's got to come back. And there's that same amount of time. Let's say it takes a year to get, but I believe it was more than just a year. I believe he probably stayed there in Padan Aram. I feel like perhaps maybe as much as 10 years had passed by. We're not told here, but I will give you some years before we get through here tonight. But when he comes back, what's the first thing that Jacob does? You know? Well, I told you this last week. What was it he built? An altar. An altar. What's he wanting to do with an altar? What do you do with an altar? You worship. And he's worshiping. And this, as I pointed out, the whole time he was with Laban, you didn't hear about Jacob praying. You didn't hear about him only when he was getting ready to leave. He talked to the father. But from the time he left Bethel and traveled to his father-in-law, and the time he came back, I don't think Jacob's interest was that much with God. Jacob had one thing in mind, that was Jacob, and he was taking and making his making a name for him. But Jacob now, he moves south, probably intending to move all the way back to be with his father in Hebron. But we find that he doesn't get there right off. Notice, and I pointed out when I read it, he came a little way to come to Ephraim. Just a little way. That's pointed out twice. We read it twice here. And when he almost reached Ephraim, the region around Bethlehem, another notable event took place. Both a joyful thing happened to him and a tragedy. It was here that Jacob's beloved wife, Rachel, who's been barren now for, I feel, at least 12 to maybe 15 years. I think probably Joseph, when he went to his brothers, which was just shortly after this event here, and after that event took place, he was taken captive. I mean, he put into the hands of the Ishmaelites and taken off into captivity. I feel that he was at least 15 years of age, and maybe as much as 17, 18. Some believe he's only about 12 years of age when they done this, when this happened. We don't know. We're not told. I'll give you some figures later on, but we find here that Rachel, however old Joseph was, Rachel has been barren that number of years. She hadn't had any more children. As a matter of fact, after Joseph was born and Leah gave birth a couple of times more, then there wasn't more children come into Joseph's household, and I believe his wives were just getting too old to bear children. Now, some of us here can remember years ago, especially when I was young, a woman that got pregnant in old age, sometimes it cost her life. Does anybody know of anybody that died bearing a child, or hearing of a woman bearing a child when she's old?
Years ago.
It used to, pardon?
Years ago.
Years ago, it used to happen all the time. Now, keep this in mind. Rachel had to be pregnant for a while, and here she is traveling with Jacob. They're on the road traveling, and they're not riding in a Cadillac. At best, they would be riding on a camel. And that wouldn't be the most comfortable way to ride any place, and especially if you're with child. Now, it was, she must have been getting along in years is what I'm trying to get to. I don't think Rachel was a young woman here. And I don't think his other wives were young either, unless it would have been his concubines. Now, Jacob's other wives had long since ceased bearing children, and Rachel is now going to give Jacob son number 12. Benjamin is going to be born. Now, the baby is going to cost Rachel her life. That's going to be the tragedy. Was this because of an oath made back? And I keep writing this, and I can't find anybody else that even brings it up, but I keep thinking back when she had that God of her father's household God. Jacob said, if anybody's got that God, let him die. In other words, he was ready to have him killed. Well, he didn't know, I don't believe at that time, that Rachel had that God. But what has he done now? He, if that wasn't the reason, God was through with Rachel as far as Jacob's life was concerned. Rachel, I believe she was probably a very godly woman. I know she was a very lovely woman, and Jacob, he loved her, as we pointed out, more so than he did his other wives. Now, when she died in grief, she named her son Benoi, which means son of sorrow. And what a name to attach to one of your sons or one of your children, son or daughter of sorrow. To have to carry that name the rest of their life, that would have been unimaginable. So when she died, and I believe she probably did die before this, but Jacob, though no doubt experiencing real anguish in his own soul, in his own heart, he was very, very sorrowful of soul. When he saw Rachel leaving, he didn't want his son to be named that name, so he changed the name to Benjamin. And right here, I'm going to stop and ask a question and see how far advanced you are. Benjamin. When you think of Benjamin, there's two very important men out there. Now think of the tribe, not the son Benjamin, but the tribe Benjamin. And there's going to be two very important men that's going to come out of this tribe. Who might they be? Who? Are we all in agreement with that? Saul? Are you talking about King Saul? Yes. King Saul. Okay. How many's in agreement? King Saul come out of the tribe of Benjamin. Who was the other man that came out of this tribe? By the same name, by the way. Does that help you? Okay, the other Saul's in the New Testament. Saul of Tarsus. And by the way, he's from the tribe of Benjamin. Both of them. Both Sauls. But Saul didn't remain Saul in the New Testament. His name was changed to Paul. And so you're excused for maybe not picking up on that. But when I was going through this, that happened to hit into my mind. Thus giving him, I'm talking about Jacob's son, Benjamin now, this name, son of my right hand. That's what this name means. Now, what does that say that Jacob is saying about Benjamin? Benjamin is going to be a very important figure in Jacob's life. Of course, we know this. Jacob had his eyes set on one son, and who was that son? Joseph. It was his special son. But I believe that when Jacob thought, if he did think, and I'm sure there was some question in Jacob's mind about Joseph, whether he died accidentally or not. But anyway, we'll take care of that when we get there. But Joseph, I believe when he was taken from Jacob, Jacob then leaned towards Benjamin. Why? Why would he love this son so much? Who? Because it was Rachel's son. He loved Rachel. And I'm sure that Jacob loved every one of his children. And you've heard me say this many times, and I'll say it again tonight. Please, if you have children, don't make a difference. I don't care what they've done. I don't care where they've been. I don't care what they're even doing. They're yours. Care for them and love them. As parents, that's what we're supposed to do. Love our children. And I tell you what, when we make a difference with our children, we're going to pay for it. And we see that Jacob paid for it. Because we're going to see as we get into the life of Joseph, Jacob is what caused that. Because he made Joseph a special son. Well, here I am getting ahead of myself. But Rachel was barren probably for quite some time. And when she bore this son to Jacob, his last son, he took now great pride in Benjamin. By the way, in the tribes, as we get off into them, Benjamin is going to be one of the lesser tribes that you read about in the Bible, in the Old Testament. And you're going to see that Judah is the tribe that's going to pick up. But Rachel was buried nearby, it says, on the way to Jerusalem in Ephrath. Now, in Micah, I was typing this out and I got Micah 52. Now, what do I mean by that? Micah what? Micah 5:2. I forgot to put the 2 dots in between it. But in Micah 5:2, what do we read there? Anybody tell me? Let me flip over here. Micah 5:2, what's it about? Okay, and it's about, somebody want to hurry up and find that? You got a telephone, hurry up and get it for me. I was going through for Brayton this morning, showing off to him and quoting the Old Testament. I got over to the, okay, 5:2, what does it say? Read it, Pat. Yeah. Okay, there we go. Ephrathah, though thou be little among the thousands, out of thee shall, and what's it talking about that? Out of thee is going to come what? The birth of Jesus. That's where he's going to be born. By the way, we say Ephrathah, but what is Ephrathah? Ephrathah here is Bethlehem. That's where Jesus was born. And so, see how you fit things together when you're studying your Bible? One place is called Ephrathah, another place is called Bethlehem. And so, here the prophecy by Michael is given. Jacob erected a marker over Rachel's grave. And I think it was J. Vernon McGee I was reading after. I'm pretty sure it had to be. And he said, I've been there to that grave many times. It's still there. The marker is still there. Now, what have we seen in this chapter? In Jacob's life here at Padan Aram. And now it was now severed. He's completely out of that territory. And what does he do? The first thing he does, he takes this teraphim, that god that Rachel had brought from her father's household, and he buried it. Where did he bury it? Okay. Buried it under an oak, didn't he? And then they traveled. I mean, in verse 8, we find that then Deborah was Rachel's, probably Rachel's, the one was caring for her. She was the nurse. She was Rebekah's nurse, Jacob's mother. And she dies. And Jacob has another burial. He buries her under an oak, it says. And now Rachel is buried. And death was written clear across the entire scene here in these chapters. Possibly, like I said, most say 30 years. I was reading Wiersbe today, and Wiersbe said probably a little over 20 years. Well, Jacob was in with Laban for 20 years. You got to give him time to travel there and travel back. And I believe, my personal opinion was, he stayed probably in Padan Aram at least 5 years, or maybe more. We don't know how long he was there. But Jacob had set a pillar at Bethel to commemorate his meeting with God when he left Bethel. And now he's coming back, and he sets another pillar to memorialize his beloved wife Rachel. Ephrath means fruitful. And Bethlehem, which are both the same place, means, somebody tell me, what does Bethlehem mean? You Bible scholars? Randy? Pat? Kyra? Gavi? Huh? Okay, there we go. It's kids coming up from the back. House of, did you say God? Yeah. House of bread. House of bread. Okay. And Israel journeyed and spread his tent beyond the tower of Edar. In verse 21, we read this. Now, Jacob then, he continues south for a while, stopping again near the tower of Edar, a location apparently near Jerusalem. And while there's another unfortunate and disgusting event to take place in verse 22, I'm not going to dwell very long on this, but something happens there. And let me just read it from the text. And it came to pass when Israel, that's Jacob, dwelt in the land that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine. Doesn't say it was rape. I believe it was consensual. My own personal opinion. I believe that Reuben, probably, maybe 20 or in his early 20s, and let's give him even 25. He's a young man. Bilhah, Rachel's, yes, and by the way, she was one of Jacob's wives. And but just think about this. Here's a young man. I'm not making excuses. Please. You can't make excuses for something like this. But I feel that she had to be probably at least 10 years older than him. And here he is and she is, and we don't find there's any force here. We're not even told how many times. It doesn't make any difference how many times. The thing of it is, it happened, and Jacob knew about it. Somehow he had heard about it, and listen, it's going to affect. Well, let me just show you something. Turn your Bibles going over to chapter 49. And what did Jacob do when it happened? We're not told that he done anything. It's just dropped right there. But turn with me to chapter 49, and let's look at a couple verses here and see if something happens. Reuben, remember, was the oldest son of Jacob. He should have gotten the blessing, the father's blessing, and be the next in line, like Jacob was, for the inheritance. But listen to what it says. And Jacob called, verse 2, gather yourselves together and hear, ye sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father. Israel speaking here. Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength. That's why the firstborn is recognized. The beginning of his strength, the excellency of dignity, and the excellency of power. Unstable as water. Thou shalt not excel, because thou wentest up into thy father's bed. Jacob never forgot. He may have not done nothing about it back here, but he did not forget what happened. And I want to tell you something, because of that one single act, or maybe it was more than once. We're not told. It's none of our business. But whatever it was, it cost Reuben. It cost him his right to have the blessing bestowed upon him. Well, after the affair and the birthright, as Jacob, like I said, he never forgot what had happened. And we move on to verses 23 down through 26. And now what do we find? We find here that the sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. These are Leah's sons, the 5 that she bore to, or is there 6? Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun, 6 of them. And please forgive this mind of mine, it can drift at times. And the sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin, even though they were born towards the end, they are mentioned next. Why? Because of the women. And the sons of Zilpad, Leah's handmaid, Gad and Asher, these are the sons of Jacob, which were born unto him in Padan Aram. And Jacob came, and Isaac his father, unto Mamre, unto the city of Arbad, which is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac sojourned. So as we get to this point, and I was ready to give up and say, what is there left here to talk about? Well, let me just say this. Jacob is finally back home, and Isaac is still living in Hebron. And Abraham, this is where Abraham had lived, and now at age 180 years of age. And by the way, Isaac lived longer than Abraham as far as years. He lived longer than Jacob, his son, and Esau as well. Now, at 180 years, his spirit, no doubt, was transported to a place called Sheol. Sheol. Why do we say that? Did Abraham, when he died, Isaac, when he died, did they go to heaven? Where did they go? They went to a place called Sheol in the Old Testament. And what's it called in the New Testament? Can anybody tell me? What?
Paradise.
Well, where you're jumping ahead of me. In the Old Testament, when they died, they went to Sheol. Even up until Christ, when he was crucified, up until that time, they didn't go to heaven, did they? They went to, we call it paradise, but what would the Greek word for it be? Sheol and Hades. Hades. And what are we talking about here? Well, let's just stop right here and let me just give you a little lesson on this. When an Old Testament soul died, and up until when Jesus went to the cross and died, everybody that died, even John the Baptist, when John the Baptist when he died, where did he go? Did he go to heaven? No. He went to a place called Hades in the New Testament, Sheol in the Old Testament, because the two words are, Sheol is Hebrew, and Hades is the Greek word for it. That's why when you get in your Bible, you got to think about this. Where was this at? Anybody have any idea? Down. Remember the story that, and it's more than a story, it was really a happening, and it wasn't a parable. Jesus said there was a rich man, and there was a man by the name of Lazarus. The rich man, it says that Lazarus was a beggar. He comes to the rich man's house and he knocks on the door. He's wanting help. And the rich man, he didn't have time for Lazarus. He said no. And we're not talking about Mary's and Martha's brother now. We're talking about another Lazarus. And it says that Lazarus died. And they probably took his body, took it over here, and cast it on to the place called Gehenna, where they just burned the trash. He was a poor man, couldn't afford a burial. But then it says, or Jesus said, then the rich man died. And in hell, he lifted up his eyes. And he looked across this gulf. Over here is Sheol. Over here is hell. It's a place of torment. And Lazarus is here, the rich man's here, and here's the gulf. And the rich man cried out, seeing Lazarus and seeing Abraham, he said, send Lazarus over here that he may dip his finger in water and cool my tongue. And you know the story there. Let me just stop right there. I just hope you understand. It's in a place, a compartment in the heart of the earth someplace, down. And I believe that some of it is still there. When Jesus died, where did he go? When those 3 days, when they put his, actually before they even put his body in the grave, you think Jesus went into that grave? Not his spirit, and not Jesus. They just took his body, and put it in the tomb. But when Jesus said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. Now, we think, it just sounds like that Jesus went back to the Father right there. But in the book of Ephesians, it says that Jesus, what is it that he descended? He come down here to this earth, and when he was crucified, I believe, he went on down into paradise. He didn't go into the fiery place. There was nothing that he could do over there because those people sealed their doom. And by the way, it was filled back at that time. Think of all of the people we talked about that were perished in the flood. They all lost. They were lost and went to this place in the heart of the earth. And think about it. Probably millions and millions and millions of people were there. But over here in Sheol, and this is where when Isaac died, that's where he went. And he joined Abraham, and he joined all of those, Noah's sons. And I'm going to show you this before we leave here this morning or this evening. But now, that was in this compartment. I believe that's where Jesus went and preached to those that were in Sheol. Now, the Bible says, what is it that he led captivity captive and took them out of this place? And when he, after his resurrection, they said they was seen many here on this earth. I believe they went, and Jesus took them at that time into paradise. Now, there's a lot of people that don't think there's going to be a resurrection of the Old Testament saints until after the millennium. Now, just think about this now. We're talking about 2,000 plus years at this time, and now we're talking about 6,000 years from the time that all of this took place, and 4,000 from the time Isaac was buried, and Jacob. All of that time, where they been? They were in this place called paradise with Abraham, the souls. Jesus, I believe, emptied that. And now, here's the question I want to share with you, or ask you. Why did they have to stay there? Why couldn't they go on into heaven? Got me.
Because Jesus hadn't died for their sins yet, so they weren't sanctified.
Okay. Very good, Gabi. You see, God doesn't do anything presumptuously. Even though he knew Jesus was going to die, Jesus hadn't died, so the debt hadn't been paid for heaven to be opened up. And so after Jesus died and went and he led captivity captive, he took them out of there and took them on to heaven. Now, who was it? Randy come in tonight and asked me if I believe this old body, and I don't know what I said this morning, caused Randy to think that I said this old body is going to come out of the grave. Maybe I did say that, but I didn't mean this old body. We're going to have a new body. We're going to be given a new body. But the Old Testament saints, there's where the truth lies in all of this. The rapture, who's going to go up? The church. The church is going to be raptured. And what about the Old Testament saints? Are they going to be given bodies? They'll get their body, but it won't be the same time we get ours. We're going to get our new body at the rapture. And well, here I go off chasing rabbits, getting down areas I probably shouldn't. But I just want you to know that that's where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Esau, and those, and I really believe probably Esau may have gotten saved. I'm not sure about that. But let me move on here, finish up this chapter, and show you. I was ready to stop right here, but I got to studying this afternoon, sitting at my desk. Isaac's death. Think about what happened now. It changed Jacob's responsibilities. Let me tell you why. Now Isaac is gone. And Jacob now, he's in charge. You see, all of that territory that God promised to Abraham, who gets it? Jacob. Israel. That belongs to them. So, what do we got to do? We got to get Esau out of there. He's no longer going. We're going to give him chapter 36, and then he's gone. And I'm not going to try to cover chapter 36. I looked at this and studied it this afternoon and thought about it. But Isaac's death gave Jacob now the responsibility. He's now the head of the family. That's what Esau sold. And the heir of the covenant blessing. He not only has Isaac's great wealth, it all belongs to Israel now. He also got all that land that was promised to Abraham. So you got to get rid of Esau. But he also is inherited all that was involved in the Abrahamic covenant. And that's where I wanted to bring you to. In verses 23 to 26, we were given 12 sons of Jacob. I read them to you. Why here? I don't know why their names appear here, but maybe it was because this would, we got a list of the 12 tribes. And I sat today and was thinking about this, and these thoughts run through my mind. We get to chapter 36, and I'm not going to cover it. I'm going to skip over it for the most part. But 36, let me just tell you, it gives us a long section of the book which seems originally to have been written by Jacob. It's my personal opinion that Jacob probably is the writer here. We do know that Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy was written by who? Moses. But listen to me. Moses had to get this information from someplace. A lot of people think that God sat down with Moses and gave Moses all of this in that 40 years when he's out there in the wilderness trying to lead 2 million people into the promised land. And probably God did meet with Moses on several occasions and give him this. I want to tell you something. Up until the year 40, Moses did not know God, even though he was Moses. But from 40 to 80, Moses was what? He was watching his father-in-law's sheep. I don't believe it was till 80 years of age that when God and Moses came together, or God revealed himself to Moses, Moses really came into the picture. Now, some believe that these writings started out with, let's go clear back to Seth, or let's go clear back to Adam. How would we know what happened in chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4 if somehow either God with special revelation gave it to somebody, And most scholars believe he passed all this off to Moses, and Moses wrote it. That's the reason why a lot of people don't believe the Bible. This couldn't have been. Well, I want to tell you something. This book we call the Bible, like Morse said this morning, it's a miracle book. I believe that probably Adam wrote, he passed it on to Seth. Seth wrote, he passed it on to Noah. Noah wrote, he passed it on to Shem. Shem wrote, he passed it on to Terah, or Abraham's daddy, or maybe to Abraham himself. Abraham wrote, passed it on to Isaac. Isaac wrote, passed it on to Jacob. Jacob wrote and passed it on through his family until we get to Exodus and Moses is born. You got all of this. And that makes more sense to me, and God is making it so that everybody, we got a Bible, yes.
Well, when you think about it, when your family, I don't know about you guys' family, but my family, they told the stories from like my great-grandmother and my mother and my grandmother and all that kind of stuff, We passed that on. At that time, they didn't have TV, they didn't have really big books, or it wasn't readily available. So those stories were, I think, passed on from family to family.
It makes much more sense, does it not?
Yeah.
But
there's a lot of stuff that I didn't find out until I was an adult.
you know what? They tried to prove that there wasn't writing back in the before the flood. There was. It's been proven that there was writing, but let's just move on from these. Given this long section here of the book, it's been written, I believe, mostly by Jacob. This is my opinion. And there are the generations of. Remember what I said? And I'm out of time again. But remember what I said way back here in Genesis chapter 5. We started this. And I pointed out in chapter 5, this is the book of the generation of Adam. We move from there to chapter 6 in verse 9. And what do we read there? These are the generations of Noah. We go from Genesis chapter 9 to chapter 10 in verse 1 of chapter 10. And notice, these are the generations of the sons of Noah. And then he has Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then we jump from there to chapter 11 on down to, verse 10. And then it says, these are the generations of Shem. Why Shem? As we passed this by you before, I want you to see, it has to be this one. This is the father of the Jewish, eventually the Jewish people, the father of Abraham. We jump from there to verse 27 of chapter 11, and these are the generations of Terah. That's Abraham's father. And then we go from Abraham's father on over we go clear on over here to chapter 25. I think it's chapter 25. Abraham's generation, let me get the right chapter here. Chapter 25 and verse 12. Notice, now these are the generations of Ishmael. Who was Ishmael? That was Abraham's first son by Abraham's or Sarah's concubine. And then we jump from there down to verse 17 or 19. And we read, these are the generations of Isaac. And we go from Isaac's generation on over to where we are now, where we're at now. We go from there. We pass, for the sake of time, we come over now to chapter 36. These are the generations of Esau. Now the question is, why Esau? Why do we need his genealogy? He's not in the picture here, is he? But apparently Jacob is writing here, and maybe at his father's graveside, or at the time that he meets with Esau, he gets with him and he gets a listing. I may as well tell you this. Don't get hung up on it. But if you take the listing of the names of Esau here and go back to chapter 24, where we find that Esau married so-and-so, it doesn't line up with our Bible. Different names. You take this, and somebody said, well, right here's a mistake in the Bible. Well, I want to tell you what I feel that was. Names change. When Esau married these women, the names might have been one place, but they changed when Esau gave them to Jacob. Or somehow the names do change there. And some people take that and say, well, right here's a mistake in the Bible. The Bible says this, but it says this in another place. Well, remember this. We're talking about years of going, and these names that change. That's not going to be no problem to me. But the thing of it is, I want you to see that probably Jacob got this information and he records Esau. And when we get to the end of chapter 36, we don't read anymore about Esau, his generation, or anything else. Why? It's important that you answer this question. Why don't we read about Esau? Pardon? Not part of them. He's not part of the inheritance. He forfeited that. But God gave us his genealogy here, his sons and their sons, and we got all of these dukes and everything. Now let me ask, okay.
When you were saying those names didn't line up, they were foreign names also. So maybe they would have put them in their own language. And it would be like, for instance, if Richard was born in Spain, it would be Ricardo.
That'd be an answer for it, yes. Okay.
You read in one part of the Bible, and Jacob's Jacob, and you read in another, and people didn't read the whole thing, they wouldn't know that Israel was Jacob.
Yeah.
And just like Saul became Paul.
Yeah. Okay, but Randy.
Names can change.
Randy.
Well, God promised Hagar of our children would be.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't going to bring it up to you. Yeah. I wasn't going to bring it up to you, but I thought, well, if somebody might stumble over this and figure out there's a mistake here, somebody might do it, because somebody that reads their Bible and studies it, and you find these discrepancies, and they want to make so much out of it. But there is an answer for it. But there's something, yes.
I may be a big dummy, but things like that, I can't explain. I just go to Deuteronomy 29:29.
That's good. That's a good answer. But before we stop right here, and I'm going to skip 36 altogether. I mean, other than saying this for us, it may have been possible that Jacob obtained from Esau all of these records and Esau's family, and then incorporated them. I believe that probably Jacob wrote this and passed it on, and it got to Moses' hand. But let me ask you, Jacob settles in what we know is Israel, in Palestine. That's his territory. That was given to Abraham. Jacob, Israel now, has received the inheritance. Where does Esau go? Where does Esau go? Do we read about him in the Bible? Huh? Okay, that's good. Let me ask this: Who is Esau's descendants? Edom. And where's Edom? Anybody know? I've been there. Would you believe this little old country preacher has been there?
That's where, what's that last place we went to?
Huh?
What's that last place we went to?
We crossed over.
Petra, that's where Petra is. Yeah. It's in over in
We crossed over.
area of Jordan.
We crossed over right below the Dead Sea. We changed guides because the Israeli guide, Brother Boaz, our guide, was not allowed in Edom, which is now Jordan.
Saudi Arabia, maybe?
And Jordan. And there's your two half-brothers, half-twin brothers. Jacob, Israel, Esau. He's lost it. He forfeited it all. But he's over in Jordan, in that territory now. And that's what you're going to find. All of his descendants there. And you're going to read more about them. What did Moses call them? Did anybody tell? Can anybody tell? Huh? What was he when Moses came into? Anybody? I think I have it in my notes here. It's possible that Moses later argument these original records with additional data that he had in his possession. By Moses' time, the descendants of Esau, by then known as the Edomites, who gave Israel fits. Remember David and all of the, clear on through, you'll find that the Edomites and some of these, all these other ites, and I even say some of the termites, they had to get rid of over there to get into the land. Okay, any questions? We want to leave.